Welcome, everybody, to the Dig In podcast. This is Jess Gaedeke, and I am so excited to be joined today by Anna Estlund. She's Senior Director of Insights and Strategy at Pernod Ricard. I have been really looking forward to this conversation, so thank you for being here.
Happy to be here, Jess. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we're going to get going with an impromptu question. So you haven't seen this one yet, but I really love this question and I can't wait to hear your answer. If you could snap your fingers today and become an expert in anything, what would it be?
Ooh, I would love to be an expert in multiple languages. So, like my own version
Yeah,
of Rosetta Stone within myself. I
sure.
can speak like elementary Spanish and French and like can get around enough to be dangerous, but am nowhere near
Mhm.
fluency. So I'm actually an English teacher for adult learners, and a lot of them are Spanish speakers.
Cool.
So I
Mhm.
use my basic Spanish as best as I can, but it would be great to be able to have more of a conversation with my students.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like you're well on your way. So, just get your own version of your Rosetta Stone. I like that as a life goal for you. Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about your background and your role today at Pernod.
Yeah, so I'm a leader in strategy, insights, and analytics. So I consider myself more of a marketer, more of a generalist than a specialist. I'm more in the insights world now. So as you said, I lead an insights and strategy team at Pernod Ricard. We are a global wine and spirits company, so we are number two globally. We have awesome brands like Jameson, Absolute, Kahlua, and Screwball, Mum Champagne. I could go on. We have a big portfolio. So I lead a team of about 10 people in brand innovation, shopper, and then portfolio insights. And I've been with the company for 4.5 years. Before Pernod, I was at Nestle, General Mills, and then worked in sports for the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Twins. And I would say a common thread of my CPG era that I'm in now is working on global businesses. So I've had an expat
Mhm.
role in Switzerland. I've worked for a Latin America regional team. And even though I'm in a US role now, I work with my global counterparts all the time, daily, on either like big business questions or building new capabilities. So that's been a part of my career that's really energized me, I would say.
Yeah. I love the diversity of that experience. I think when we talked, I was like, oh my gosh, how cool to start in the sports industry and be able to, kind of get that part as part of your experience. And the diversity of what you manage today is one of the things that we'll dig into. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's dig in. So our listeners really do crave inspiration from other leaders. And I think one of the best ways to inspire is to tell a story. And at
Mhm.
Pernod, you really saw and were part of that era of the explosive growth of the hard seltzer canned cocktail segment. And I think that that's a great example of a fundamental consumer and category shift that I'm sure brought many lessons and many opportunities for the brands that you manage. So, what was the category context at the time when that, explosive growth really started? What consumer trends were you watching and anticipating at the time?
Yes. I thought this would be a fun story because so many of us in marketing are either like experiencing big category shifts or have. So I joined Pernod in
Hmm.
2020, which was really, like you said, the boom of hard seltzers. So think about it. There are kind of like three big macro categories in alcohol. You have beer, you have wine, and you have spirits, which is more of where my company plays. And so this is the land of giants and big budgets. So think like enormous brands like Budweiser and Jack Daniels, which are not my brands, but right, it's like
Yeah.
that level of brands. So one of the most fascinating things I would say coming into the company early on was these are new to world brands. So you had Truly and White Claw especially like exploding onto the scene. And so while there were these like kind of smaller, cooler offerings in the past, so like Smirnoff Ice or this Jack Daniels like country coolers or Bacardi Breeze, like all of those
Hmm.
existed, but you had these new brands come out with convenience in a can versus a bottle. So first they were delivering on convenience.
Hmm.
The second thing I would say is they were doing a better job in what we were watching at the time, right? Everybody in the industry still is on wellness. So these brands and the category really took a lot of cues from one of my old worlds of just sparkling water. Like literally it's in the name seltzer. right? And so it was the codes and cues, so what we call semiotics of seltzer through and through. So the feeling of being more light or refreshing or like natural flavors. So think of like the purity of the white can, the skinny can itself, and like the fruit imagery. Even if they
Mhm.
weren't saying it, they were very much cueing that. Um, the other thing that was going on that I think is fascinating is cultural relevance. Said more humanly, it was on trend. Like my favorite quote from that era that you would hear from consumers is there ain't no laws when you're drinking claws. So, which was about White Claws.
I didn't hear that one. That's good.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I heard it in research like right when I joined. I was like, oh, that's amazing. So you would like you saw young men especially engaging with this category in a way that was very different than in the past. So like in my college days, you wouldn't see that many guys drinking like Smirnoff Ice or Mike's Hard Lemonade, right? So there was this whole kind of on trend thing that was very broadly appealing. The final thing is what I think helped it explode in what we were watching, and I think has sunk in more for me now, is this idea of control. So in a can, you have more control. You might have multiple cans, a lot of people do, but you have the perception of control, right? Like I have more of a sense of how much alcohol is in there versus a margarita that a bartender might make me or like a big pour of wine. And so that feeling of control matters so much more now because especially for like Gen Z, right? Like if I'm out drinking, I might end up on social media. So it's that kind of like always on publicity in your own social circle that can happen. So
Sure.
the feeling of control, I think, just matters a lot more than it did 20 years ago, right? When these coolers were like
Mhm.
popular. So you have all those things coming together of like the convenience and control of beer, the kind of flavorful, fun parts of a cocktail, and then it feels like a healthier choice. So all of that just in total, I think is what now what we call ready to drink. So that's either hard seltzers or canned cocktails
Mhm.
is 1 of 10 alcoholic beverages in the US. Was not the case in 2020.
Yeah. It's just incredible.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just incredible how fast that shifted, and I
Yes.
imagine being a brand leader at that time where that shift is happening, it's probably your organization was wanting to chase a lot of flashy objects, a lot of, like, oh, competitors doing this in the category. So, and
Yes.
I don't know, you tell me, but I probably an opportunity to really reorient your team's priorities. So how did you do that when it's such a
Mhm.
fast-moving opportunity?
Yeah, such a good question. It was hectic at the beginning. One, I was in build mode with my team. So I was personally doing a lot of
Mhm.
the insights and strategy work with marketing and with our C-suite, honestly, because it's a totally different business model than spirits. You're in a can, so you're like
Mhm.
different sourcing of aluminum, different production processes, different shelf life, different route to market. Like you want to be cold, cold is sold. So like all of these different things were so fundamentally different that we had to find our way to be true to who we are as canned cocktails, which is very different than hard seltzers. And it took a while to get there. So to your question on resourcing, it was first like just laying that foundational strategy of why is hard seltzers winning, which is all the stuff I just told you. Then it was finding our way on
Mhm.
canned cocktails, which is actually solving a little bit of a different pain point. It's most of the stuff I just said, but it's then layering on, it's kind of, there's a lot of barriers to making cocktails at home, right? I might not know how to make it. I
Yeah.
might not have all the ingredients on hand. If I do, I've got to plan for them. I've got to pay for all those separate ingredients. So if you can solve those pain points and bring somebody more of like a kick-ass quality cocktail in a can for those convenience moments, like I'm at a backyard barbecue, I'm at a beach party, I'm at a concert, like that was a pretty big unlock for us. But it took time to say exactly to your point of what not to chase, like we at the beginning were, how do we do the hard seltzer game? It took us time to find our way into a how do we be a more convenient cocktail. That was a very different reframing and unlock
Mhm.
that took some time to get there. Um, so just to kind of go back to your core question on resourcing with the team, it was like build mode at the beginning, Then it was my innovation insights team, like really thinking fast about, okay, now that we have the strategy, what brands do we launch with? What flavors do we do? What's our pack format? What's our pack design? All of that stuff. Um, it kind of transitioned to my shopper insights team over the years, because then it was more like, how do you win at retail? How do you help your retailer partners understand like what to do with this exploding category? Like, where do you put it in the store? What's the right kind
Right.
of shelf set, right? Like, how do your shoppers make decisions in the aisle? Is it more about brand first, flavor first, kind of pack format first, right? So I would say now it's a lot of brand questions. So we have canned cocktails on our three biggest brands, Jameson, Absolute, and Malibu, are kind of the core focus for us, which is great because it can also like
Hmm.
sync with our brand strategy of signature cocktails. So it's like Jameson, ginger and lime, Absolute, Cosmo, Malibu, Pina Colada. But then the brand questions back to that is like, okay, well, are we recruiting new people into the brand? Is it like if I think about my overall net brand budget and just the resources I have, like how do I allocate that for the brand? So the questions in my 4.5 years have evolved, but have always kind of been at that like really interesting bigger business question level of like, this is a very fundamentally different business we're getting into. And we have to wrestle with how do you balance that with the needs of your core profit driver of spirits at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, what an interesting question to grapple with. And I imagine it didn't go smooth sailing for each of those brand strategies. You probably had some hiccups or some times where you had to pivot. Yeah, kind of like obvious. Huh? So, can you tell me one of those? What are some of the places where you got tripped up a little bit?
Yeah. So I work in a big global business. So our global brand stewards, for Jameson sit in Ireland, Absolute sit in Sweden, so on, so on. I would say early on, one of the things was like really helping our global counterparts to understand the convenience culture in the US, which is just really
Mm,
different than the culture in Europe, which is where a lot of our, global leaders are from. So, and I've lived in Europe. So the convenience is king here in the US in a way that like our need for speed and willing to pay for convenience is just so ingrained in us. If you go to Europe, it's like a leisurely cafe culture, right? Like a to-go coffee doesn't exist in many places except for the UK. Um, it's it's looked at more of a fear of if a brand brings something that's more convenient in a different format, there were more hesitations in our organization of what does that do to my core brand? Where in the US as consumers, right, we're
yeah,
like, oh my gosh, my favorite brand, like give it to me in all ways that make my life easier. Like it's a benefit versus a burden. And so I would say one
right.
of those trip ups was just more just helping people understand through empathy, right? Whether that was consumer research and then involving them in that, or even just like when they do come here and visit us and do strategy discussions or whatever, like getting them into the store. Because that's the other place where you just
Yeah,
immediately see like, what a canned cocktail aisle here looks like versus France is like so different. It's massive here, right? It's
yeah,
bigger than like gin and tequila and some of these other categories that they would think might be bigger. So that was one place I think we found a better way as an organization, and it took some time to get there because it was so US culturally driven.
yeah. Well, that's a great example of how you can, enable those global counterparts to gain more empathy for a local market is, bring them to the market and let them
Yeah.
experience, the streets and the restaurants and the stores. Are there any other things that you did to sort of reinforce that empathy building over time? Because sometimes you can learn a
Mm.
lot on that trip. And then how do you take it home and really make sure that it permeates the organization?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I haven't done this specifically like with the RTD lens or canned cocktail lens, but I have done it actually with you guys with Dig and with Ignite 360, that part of your company. Um, is when they come here is actually have them talk to consumers. So when we had our absolute Malibu and Kahlua leadership here last fall, we organized just like a really informal thing at a bar where we had consumers come in and talk about very broadly, like what are they drinking, what's going like what's their social occasions behind alcohol, how has that changed since COVID, what do they think of XYZ brands. We would bring out just very informally like bottles from behind the bar and kind of talk through and do little sorting games and stuff. And so while that wasn't RTD only, like that moment matters so much more sometimes of like the face-to-face part than what I can do of trying to show somebody a video or give you a quote in a deck or give you a stat in a slide or a chart. And budgets don't always allow for that. So it is hard sometimes to like, especially get your senior leadership to buy into that. But I found those moments, whether here at Nestle, other companies, are some of the most powerful and illuminating, right? Like we all gravitate towards stories. And so that has
Yeah.
been, I think, one of the more powerful ways to be able to have that happen.
Yeah. Well, that's a great illustration of how you were able to empower that empathy across the organization. And yes,
Mm.
talking to consumers, hearing it in their words, being kind of, elbow to elbow around the bar is one way to do that. So that's a great example. So in terms of, you guys going after canned cocktails in a big way, when did you consider that a success? Did you have a specific milestone where as a business you said, we did well here?
It's a great question. I think we probably had three phases of success if I think about it. The first was just getting the strategy right, right? Like which brands, and I mentioned the three and kind of our hero cocktails and really being true to who we are as spirits brands versus playing the seltzer game. The second is like really committing to the business model because like I said, it's different
Hmm.
production, you have you're selling into a different buyer within retail. It's just a different game. So us investing in some of those capabilities, like really thinking deeply about how we structure our teams and our budgets and all of that was a signal like, okay, we're in this because the consumer demand is there and that's not going to go away. And yes, you can make cocktails more convenient with like plus ones, like a gin and tonic, right? But still, this is meeting a different occasion, a different consumer's needs. And so, like, that realization to me was really big. The third and probably most important is the business impact. So we are the top vodka and rum selling brands within canned cocktails, which is amazing with Absolute Malibu. We're in the top three with Jameson. We've had
Sure.
the biggest launch last year with Absolute Ocean Spray, which was a really, successful partnership for us. So proof is in the pudding, I
Mhm.
guess, there and actually, meeting consumer needs, but driving the business too. And recruiting new consumers into our brands has been a huge part of that.
That's a big deal. It's sort of the holy
Yeah.
grail, right, of what any beverage alcohol manufacturer really wants. So what's your biggest takeaway from this canned cocktail experience that continues to
Yes.
evolve? But what's your biggest learning?
So I've lived this kind of just now across big category shifts. So Greek yogurt, granola and cereal, this one in alcohol, I'm sure there are more. Um, I guess my reflection as a kind of strategy and insights leader is to really think about the question behind the question you're getting. And so there's probably two areas I would hunt because naturally, when these new categories emerge, you get a lot of doubters, right? On like, why, how should we go into that new category? And the two areas I think that I would dig first, and my lessons learned have been really deeply understand the business model and really understand like the objections behind brand stretch. So the business model, all the
Mm,
things I said, right? Like you have to invest in all the new production processes and route to markets. And the question behind the question there is like, is it more profitable than what I'm doing today? And that can be hard to show
right.
in a very
Yeah.
simple way, right? Like insights teams will get asked, like, what's the incrementality on it? Like, am I bringing in new users or, new dollars to the category or what's the size of prize? But that still doesn't get you to the heart of like, is it worth my financial investment behind these capabilities and processes? That's a much bigger strategy question. So that to me is a
Right.
critical one. And then especially if in the marketing world, like brand stretch, I guess the fundamental question usually behind the question is, can our existing brands play in this space? Or do we think we have to build a new brand to do it? Or sorry, build or acquire a new brand to do it. Building and acquiring new
Hmm.
brands are really expensive. But sometimes doing it with your core brands, it's the classic innovator's dilemma where it's really hard for your big brand to dedicate the time, space, energy, money, all of that because your core business is usually so well grooved over the years that like you got a system that works.
Mhm.
And when you bring in a different business model, it's hard for that big parent brand to say, I'm going to give different time and energy to this other thing that might or might not be as profitable, right? So
Right.
again, like those are quite much deeper questions than can my brand play in RTD? But that's a surface level question you'll get. So like you really, if you
Yeah.
want to make an impact and help the organization really think through these trade-offs, I think you've got to kind of like level it up slash go deeper on the questions. A last one, Jess, I would say that like I don't have a lesson learned on. And I would love if your listeners or viewers had an answer for me or you had an answer for me. Is helping the company to see those trade-offs like early on what if you don't act now?
Mhm.
Because once you
Yeah.
get later on, right, like that's where I see brands ending up having to acquire or build a new brand, whatever, which is super expensive. So it's really hard to tell that story early on, though, when A, think something's emerging as a new category, or B, you kind of are dabbling there, but haven't
Yeah.
fully unlocked all of the kind of capabilities and business model behind it. So the like trade-offs of what if not,
Yeah.
I have not quite cracked.
Yeah. Well, and that's thanks for sharing that because, we don't have all the answers. And I do think that one of the things that I think is a magical combination is when you can look at a business question like that with the forward looking perspective that's saying, what are those emerging market signals? What are those consumer trends that are informing the opportunities of tomorrow? But then also with the quantification to build a business case to give that confidence to your leaders. And that balance is super hard to achieve, especially when you are
Yeah.
at different points in time of an explosive segment like that. So can definitely
Yeah.
empathize with how difficult it would have been in real time to do it. But it's that marriage of those two perspectives that I think businesses need in order to make those decisions and invest in the right spots. But okay, Anna. So now let's turn to you as a thought leader. Clearly, you are in an organization as well as in the industry, and you have a really passionate point of view about a topic that I can't wait to dig into. And that is the idea that shopper insights is sexy. So tell me about this concept, why you believe it so passionately, and really what that means to you.
Yes, Jess, I believe shopper insights is sexy because of the business impact you can have and the career unlock it can have for you within insights. And I think the reason I'm so passionate about it is it gets so overshadowed by brand marketing and advertising. So when I'm asked to speak on stuff like this, or even internally, it's a lot of times is about advertising and creative effectiveness. Because that's perceived as the fun part of marketing, right? It's like the Don Draper ad agency part of marketing, but it's only one of the four P's at the end of the day. Like we tend to overlook the price and the promotion and the place and that part that is like such a critical growth driver. If you look at any marketing mix model, it will tell you the fundamentals matter more. Um, and I think it's maybe it's because it feels more like sales than marketing. I'm not sure, but I'm here to tell you it's just as sexy. I'm super passionate about this. I'm like actively trying to think about how to persuade people in the industry about this. So I'm happy to talk about it more with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I love it as a premise. And I think part of probably what is making this a bigger topic nowadays is just that the more traditional insights of shopper insights, sorry, the more traditional definition of shopper insights has really changed because now we have so many blurred lines, right? It's with the presence of
Yes.
omni-channel. It's on this idea of we're not just shoppers or consumers, we're humans at the end of the day. So I think all those,
Yeah.
expanding of definitions and blurring of lines has really brought that to bear. So, how do you define
Yes.
shopper insights today? What all does it encompass?
Yeah, such a good question. I guess there's three things that have changed that I'll get to your question of like what does it include because I think it's really broad. So shopper insights kind of grew up in CPG like insights did in general, right? And so a lot of that was how do you win at retail for these big, cereal soap manufacturers, whatever. So now to your point, you have omni-channel. So e-commerce has totally changed that. And you have not just manufacturers, but retailers with insights teams. So the Krogers and the Amazons of the world have massive insights and analytics teams. Second, you have a lot more D2C brands who have their own data to play around with. So you have kind of like user experience or UX, mixed up with that. And the third would be just the critical importance and how we've gotten smarter and a lot of, data unlocks and tech unlocks have helped on pricing, or what in CPG we call revenue growth
Hmm.
management. So I would say that like all of those three things coming together have made shopper insights no longer just about how do I win at retail. It can be, how do I, it's fundamentally to me, it's about what are the insights behind the purchase of my product or service, and how do I think about those insights to better, convert you at that moment of truth. So that could be, shopper insights for CPG, for retailer, for D2C, for UX. I would argue a lot of B2B actually cover shopper insights. I think
Hmm.
pricing is a huge part of that. That often sits with finance, honestly, and CPG from what I'm observing. And I think there's better ways to wire that kind of to insights and marketing. So it could be like so big and broad and beautiful, and we tend to just think about it still really narrow. So I think that's one of the things that's holding it back, but what could make it super sexy?
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing that we talked about is, every type of research has some tie back to the business, right? Some measure of ROI or tangible impact back
Mm,
to the business. Why is that idea particularly important when you think about the role of shopper?
yeah. Um, I think one of the reasons it's so sexy, Jess, is because of that business impact and that like feeling of like being tangible. You're just closer to the point of purchase or the time the money hands over, I guess. So you feel the impact of your work, I guess, a lot more. So you can say
Mhm.
things like, I helped sell this and helped change this shelf set. I helped improve the conversion on my site. It's a feeling of immediate gratification. And so beyond that, to your point on impact, it's a place that across my team I can actually like very easily quantify the impact. So if my team, we do pricing studies, we do kind of what we call line optimizer studies or assortments, right? So if you've got a brand like the Glenlivet, which has a lot of different age statements of our scotch, so it's 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, et cetera,
Mhm.
and you're trying to think like kind of what is the best lineup for that brand and does it differ by channel and then how does price play in, all of those things. If I say we helped unlock the pricing insights behind Jameson, we optimized the assortment strategy for the Glenlivet, that unlock and translating that into actual cases sold is much easier for me to kind of rationally think through than, contributing to this ad, contributing to this product launch. It's just closer to the moment. So even if insights people don't find that business impact as sexy, I can give you another way in. Um, Empathy. It's a place that I think empathy is really lacking. Um, I guess that definitely is a place where empathy is needed. So we have done some awesome empathy treks with both our marketing and commercial teams to try to just put people in the shoes of the shopper. So, and you can make this super fun. So for example, we did one where it's like, okay, imagine you're Corey and you're in a situationship and you're going to be at a party where that person is there and you have to bring like an alcohol to the party. Like, how are you going to shop? What are you going to do? Versus another team then goes and says, okay, now you're in the mindset of you're planning a Super Bowl party and oh my gosh, you're hosting like 15 or 20 people. And of course you have to think about all the snacks and like you're going to have to know how like easy it is to make these, drinks, right? So putting like helping the team understand that that shopping mindset or mission or whatever differs that a lot between what people actually are trying to buy for can dictate how they shop, where you show up, how you show up, in store, all of those things. Just
Yeah.
people don't tend to think through that a lot because in store it's kind of like it's very tactical on like what's your price and your shelf set and stuff. So the impact that that can have an unlock on thinking of your strategy or how simple your messaging needs to be on shelf or what your even like your retail media strategy or whatever um, is really can really have a big impact because it's an untapped opportunity. So the impact opportunities are vast.
Absolutely. No, I love that kind of combination of I guess you're closer to that, final moment that really matters when they buy you.
Yeah.
And so that's a more direct correlation. And you can actually say, I contributed to that. But also, I
Yeah.
love the tie in of empathy because I think that probably is not at the forefront of thought when it comes to
Mm,
shopper, and it really should be. So those are
yes.
great examples. And for all these
Yes.
reasons, that probably contributes to why you really believe that shopper insights is a career unlock. How do you
Yeah.
how, tell us more about why you think that, but also how that plays out with how you coach your teams? I'm really curious.
Yeah. It's a good question. I believe insights leaders need to be well-rounded, like a CMO would be, right? So well-rounded in the like kind of traditional areas of insights would be brand, shopper innovation, and portfolio or kind of capability building. You can go broader than that and go analytics and strategy and stuff too. Um, but it's a place that I see a barrier just happening. And so this is across companies, it's not, only here. Is I see so many people gravitating towards the brand and innovation parts of insights for different reasons. They might think it's more strategic. I have more fun. I have more visibility with brand marketers who kind of tend to be the ones that go up to CMO. So maybe like that's a career thing. Um, but I'll give you a personal story. Like for me, it was a huge career unlock for me. It helped fast track me to director. So early on in my career, I raised my hand for a shopper insights role because it was one of the places I hadn't touched. And I wanted to do it early and kind of get my feet wet early on it. And I literally had a CMO that I really trusted be like, what are you doing? Why are you going there? Why do you want to do that? So it just gives you like a feeling of like the perception of those types of roles. And I cannot tell you just how much I learned in that role. Like one, you're a better marketer because you have to learn to think like a salesperson. You have to sell yourself and your stuff, your products and your services you're selling in like one
Mhm.
hook. You can't have a flowery concept, back a pack language, all the stuff we think through deeply as marketers,
Yep.
you realize very quickly like doesn't really matter a lot. I mean, and yes, it matters,
Right,
but like
right.
at the first moment of truth or the first trial or like the first time you get somebody to pay attention or even like be aware of you, like you gotta be so succinct. You gotta really get to the core of what matters. Um, and I learned that so fast in that role. Um, I think the other thing is like you just think about more end to end what we were talking about of like the buyer and the user of your stuff fundamentally like can be different. And so you have a better, well-rounded view of end-to-end brand strategy because you think more 360, I guess, and you learn how to bridge the
Mhm.
common divide between marketing and sales. They don't always speak the same language. They don't always have the same incentives. And that's part of, I think, the reason behind this, if I'm honest. Because I would argue shopper marketing probably has a similar barrier. And it's just as sexy. So for me, it was a career unlock. I think in coaching my teams, it's the same thing. It's like, hey guys, like because the lines are also blurrier in insights these days, like yes, I have a brand and innovation and a shopper team, but I'll tell you, my brand team does pricing work. My shopper team does category work about winning in whiskey and brand love with bartenders that you could chalk up to brand work. Like it's not as like cut and
Right,
dry
right.
as it maybe it once was. And if you want to get to bigger business questions anyways, where more of the impact of the organization is, you got to kind of ladder up above those silos anyways. So if you round up and kind of shore up that shopper part of thinking commercially, kind of thinking, succinctly, moment of truth, all of that, it makes you a better marketer. It makes you a better brand marketer at the end of the day. So that's my hook.
It makes you sexier. I mean, if we just were
It
to
makes you
summarize it.
sexier. That's right. That's right, Jess.
That's amazing. I love that perspective. And what's your hot take on
Uh,
the future of the insights industry in general? And I realize that is a very big question, but
I think insights is broader than we think it is. And maybe that's kind of been a theme in what we've been talking about of like these blurry lines and all of that. I think insights as a function will be more successful if we stop boxing ourselves into marketing research. We still kind of do a lot, even though we don't talk
mm,
about it that way, but it's kind of the core of where we like if you go to any insights conference, it's where we spend our time talking. Versus
right,
like,
right.
hey, go up to these big business model questions and strategy because it's why you have strategy consultants like the Bains and the McKinseys of the world, like taking some of the insights work that we hold so dear to our heart on marketing research and kind of what does it mean and insights to action and all of that, because they can think more broadly about, what does it mean? Like, yes, the insights, but then how does it fit broader to the org? How do I activate it? What does it mean for the structural decision? How do I scale it, et cetera? So the more we think of ourselves as strategy, insights, and analytics, like as a bigger thing versus just insights, marketing, research, I think the better off we'll be. And that's even been an evolution in my
Mhm.
thinking in my time at Pernod. I've always thought of myself more as a marketer, but I'm trying not to almost pigeonhole myself as an insights person as much lately too. So that's my latest hot take, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I love that broader definition. There's so much impact to be had there. So
Hmm.
we're going to turn to the final dig. This is all about you as a consumer, Anna. So can't wait to hear your responses here. What's the last product or service you bought on impulse?
Um, Back to our shopper insights conversation, I might struggle to delineate my online shopping, which is the vast majority of my shopping, between like impulse and just browsing. So I would argue most of my clothes shopping is
Mm.
browsing slash impulse. It's not really like a mission. Um, a more tangible example for you I could think of would be OPI nail polish. Nail polish is one of the things that's
Mm.
harder to buy online because you can't see the color or like the shine or the sparkle or whatever as much. So I recently bought 3 different colors of nail polish when I saw it in person.
Very nice. Hopefully you got out of your comfort zone. That's one place that we can do that, I feel, is on nail. What's a category or a brand that you could rationalize any price point for? You just have to have it in your life.
Jess, I am irrationally loyal to and irrationally price insensitive to my Minnesota sports teams. Specifically the
Totally get it.
Minnesota Minnesota Twins, Vikings, and Timberwolves. This very much encompasses a broad view of being a fan. So game tickets, streaming services, jerseys, merch, all of the things. Luckily, I've worked for 2 of those 3 teams, so I've had some hookups over the years. It's still have many friends in sports, so very must be in my life.
Yeah. I am the same way. My team happens to be the San Francisco 49ers, but my kids will go like, "Oh, well, I don't
Ah.
know if I can ask for this extra thing at Christmas." And I'm like, "Is it merch?" Yeah, of course I'm going to say yes to that. Like, duh. And we won't talk about questionable Super Bowl decision making either. Okay, so we love this one. Brands have distinct personalities. What's a brand you would date and a brand that you would marry? And they can be the same brand or they can be different. You have that freedom.
Uh, I am in a lifelong relationship with the Jordan brand under Nike. Ever
Okay.
since I was
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
kid playing basketball, I've loved Michael Jordan, Nike. I love the gear, so I wear a lot of it. So it's kind of that like sporty street fashion, I guess. Um, I
Hmm.
love the brand. So Jordan to me feels like a brand of champions, I guess. So their partnerships with like Paris Saint-Germain soccer or Mookie Betts in baseball, Jason Tatum in basketball, I could go on. But also their just activation and tone of voice as a marketer I really appreciate. So they did like a
Hmm.
drone show over San Francisco for the NBA All-Star game recently. They worked with Luca and when he got traded to the Lakers, they did some like they kind of trolled his former team in a couple of different ways, which I was here for.
Hmm.
Um, and so just end to end already married to Jordan.
Got it.
Date?
And would you choose a different? Yeah, I was going to say, would you cheat on
Date?
Jordan for a minute?
A minute, yes. I will. I think I'm gonna date Liquid Death. Liquid Death is just
Mhm.
so intriguing to me, having worked across a couple of that categories. Like, it's like the badass, yeah, I don't know, edgy rock and roll exterior, all that skull imagery, right? But on the inside, it's just good for you water. Um, and again, like their activations and tone of voice are just so like I love so amazing to me. So they do like collaborations with Metallica, which is very on brand. They
Mhm.
last year they did that stunt around Super Bowl time where they sold ad space on their packaging to Coinbase for some like insane amount of money to just for like a
Yeah.
play on like reaching eyeballs and stuff. So it's kind of that like naughty outside, nice inside brand, I guess. I'll date.
I love that. And those are they can push the boundaries, right? They can get away with
Yeah,
that crazy stuff. That's awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
those are great. And finally, what keeps you inspired at work? You seem like such an inspired human and professional. What keeps doing it for you?
I think for me, it's kind of where I started. Is working in a global business is just something I love. And the reason for that is I get like a daily exposure to different cultures that just fascinates me as an insights person and like almost like the anthropology side of me that get nerds out of how different cultures operate, both from a consumer standpoint, but also just like my coworkers, like how you influence different cultures is
Yeah.
fascinating to me. I will approach my French team different than my Irish team than my American team. Um, and so being in that global business and also just thinking of like the big business questions you have as a global business of like when do you scale something globally versus when do you localize and go, more of what matters to the US or to New York or whatever. It's just really interesting to me. So that keeps me constantly learning and motivated and inspired.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And that empathy for global counterparts, that's only going to personify in importance.
Mm.
So I'm so glad that you're one of the leaders forging the way. And thank you so much for sharing your lessons and your perspective. I think
Yeah.
Shopper Insights is sexy, and I'm here for this movement.
Yay. Okay, good. We've got a movement. I love it. Thank you so much, Jess.
Yeah. Thanks for joining.